Imu wanted to get rid of the entire world and had a deal with King Harold of Elbaf to bring that plan into fruition. So what does this say about King Harold? And whose side is King Harold really on? Now that's exactly the type of juicy information we love to see, especially coming back from a chapter break. And I have a lot of questions. It's not all quite making sense to me, so I need your help in unpacking all of this. In chapter 1146, Gunko shares some really interesting information, especially about Imu's plans to simply eradicate the entire world one day. No warning, no war, just poof, gone. And I suppose in some ways that's not too surprising. I mean, we do already have some precedents for this, especially because we've seen Imu eradicate Lulusia, and we know that the world government has been after the Mother Flame for a while now because it is a means to power up whatever weapon they have to wipe out entire nations within seconds. All of that, I understand. That makes sense. What I don't quite understand is why? Why would they want to get rid of the entire world? I mean, who's going to serve the Celestial Dragons in that case? Who's going to be their slaves? Who's going to ensure food production so that the rest of the Celestial Dragons can survive? I mean, it made sense when Imu was just playing God with nations. It made sense that, when a kingdom is revolting, they want to easily blast them like they did Lulusia, even though I know that Lulusia's revolt was actually a side matter. I understand that you want the ability to quell any sort of dissent, any sort of rebellion, any sort of disagreement with a simple snap of your finger. But getting rid of the entire human population, they won't have anyone to play God over. But I may be overthinking this because I guess this just does fit in quite well with that whole idea of the prophecy of the third world. Imu knew that it would soon be time for another Nika figure, the new Nika figure, to arise, and that this Nika would bring about the dawn of the new world. And so I suppose that the simple solution was that rather than risking a war where they may not win, it would be much safer, much more advisable to just blast the entire world, wipe out all of humanity, and then start again. Start from zero, create a new void century almost. And then in that sense, I think Imu's regeneration and immortality powers, that makes even more sense. And it also makes it also much more sinister. Imu is this megalomaniac whose plans are just to basically restart the world every millennia or so, just so that they can remain in power. And I think actually knowing these original plans also explains so many of the world government's previous actions or decisions. For example, the fact that they let Luffy live, the fact that they didn't really do all that much to stop Luffy, to capture Luffy, to kill Luffy, even after finding out that he has the Gomu Gomu no Mi, aka the Nika Devil Fruit, and even when he awakened his Conqueror's Haki at Marineford. I think we all found it a little bit odd that the world government just basically let Luffy be. I mean, I've even accused the world government of being incompetent. Whereas now I just think that they might have not been super concerned or as concerned, because I guess they just always figured, well, we'll be blasting the entire world anyways. Doesn't really matter that this young kid has the Nika Devil Fruit, that he's awakened his Conqueror's Haki, because soon enough, the entire world is going to die. The entire humanity, including Luffy, without the need for war, without the need for this sort of conflict. It didn't matter that Luffy could potentially be the next Nika, because the overall plan was that none of them would be alive. The plan was to eradicate all of humanity before Nika could even pose a threat. And I think this is actually going to be a really interesting lens through which we can reread the entire series. Like, I'm really excited to reread the series from the beginning, from this lens, and see how many more of the world government's actions, how many different scenarios can be reinterpreted now that we know their original plan. I mean, for example, their Buster Call on Ahara, the plan, the goal to keep the world in the dark, to make it a taboo, to keep the Void Century a secret. Up to this point, I think we all just assumed that's because that could could lead people to find out the truth about the nature of the world government, that they're not actually necessarily the good guys, that they may be painted in a bad light. Whereas now, it's actually probably a much more darker, a much more sinister plan. They want the world to stay ignorant because they don't want the rest of the world finding out about their plans to essentially blow up the entire world. But because the world government didn't actually have the technical capability to bring that plan into action earlier, sooner, they had to let humanity live so that they could basically redevelop and get to a point where they could invent the technological capacity. They've basically tasked humanity to build the technology that they're going to use to then kill humanity. I mean, that is proper dark. Now, obviously, that's no longer an option, or at the least, it's not as simple as they initially planned for it to be. And Gunko says that that's because the plans were thwarted by people like the O'Haran scholars, like Vegapunk, and I don't think that's necessarily true. The only thing that's really stopping Imu from enacting their plans is the fact that they presumably don't have the energy, they don't have the means to replicate the Mother Flame to power up whatever weapon they use to eradicate Lulusia. And as of the end of the Egghead Island arc, Punk Records is not in the world government's hands, meaning that they still don't have this capacity, this ability to replicate the Mother Flame. And so this world destruction plan has been put on hold for now, meaning they need a plan B, and plan B in this case involves Elbaf. And this is where things get even more interesting. Gunko comments that whichever side Elbaf chooses to ally themselves with in this impending final war, that's going to play a very, very big role. And I wonder whether that has more weight than simply being the fact that the Elbafians are extremely strong, capable combatants. Because it's sort of like, well, no shit, Sherlock. The Elbafian giants are obviously going to be an important factor on who wins the war because they are powerhouses. Try taking one of these big boys down. But the fact that Oda has gone out of his way to specifically point out that the Elbafians are going to play a major part, there's a reason why they play such a central role within the world government's plans. I guess you can't help but wonder or assume that there must be something more, there must be something more lore related, something special about why the Elbafians are so important. And then adding to the fact that they have this special relationship to Nika, that they have a long history of worshipping this sun deity, and then also the existence of the Harley, they've got the mural. I think all of this points to the Elbafians having some specific relevance to the prophecy. And I guess this is another one of those moments that make you look at the world government's actions more closely and in a new light. The fact that they've been experimenting with gigantification for so long, the trickery of Kashi and Omo so that they would have Elbafians in their ranks. Again, it now seems like it's more than the world government just simply wanting big, strong, large giants within their army. It seems like there really is a specific reason why the giants are so special. And then Oda adds even more significance to the Elbafians and their role in the final war with the comments that Summers makes. Because Summers makes some very, very, very suggestive remarks. And it's a little difficult to speculate in any definitive way, because I do have to say the dialogue could be interpreted in various ways. But it does very much seem like there was some deal between King Harold and the world government. Namely, it seems like King Harold agreed to turn over the Elbafians to become mercenaries for the world government. And although that makes me want to celebrate and start to cross out tiles on my bingo card that this does in fact prove Loki's innocence, or at least justifies his actions, that King Harold did indeed betray Elbaf, I do have to admit it's a little too early to start cheering yet. Because Summers says something along the lines that King Harold has messed things up, and by the tone and the dialogue, it seems like King Harold's reformation of Elbaf, his plans to turn Elbaf away from their warrior culture into their new peaceful trading culture, that this this was in direct opposition to the deal that he made with the world government. Basically, it seems like King Harold may have very sneakily made a deal with the world government, agreed to fight for the world government, but then double-crossed the world government and actually started to abolish Elbaf's warrior culture so that even if the Elbathians became mercenaries, they wouldn't actually have any real combat use. And I am really keen to read the official translation of this chapter when it comes out to see whether that changes any of the nuance and therefore my interpretation of Summers' comments. But on the whole, it is really seeming like King Harold is definitely not an easy character to read. He has some very complicated character motivations. Perhaps Harold wasn't confident in Elbaf's ability to defy the world government, and so he did strike a deal, but then in his heart of hearts he knew that that would be betraying Nika, would be betraying the people of his kingdom, and so he decided to weaken Elbaf instead so that his beloved subjects wouldn't just become the mere foot soldiers for an evil world government army. But then you have to wonder, where is the logic in that sort of plan? Because doesn't that just weaken the strength of his kingdom even further? Is it really better to get rid of the threat or the risk of your people's strength being used for bad? I mean, it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. And we obviously don't have the full picture yet, so we're just gonna have to hold off before we pass any judgment. I also do think that a big part of this mystery and a big part of Harold's motivations, the reasons as to why he's made the decisions that he has, I think it's all going to come back or at least concern Harrodin's mother. I think the race relations between the different giant tribes are going to be really important and likely to have played a big role in Harold's decisions and his motivations. But for now, I am sticking to my belief that Loki is innocent, or that at least he was justified. He's not this evil father-killing monster. Who knows, maybe King Harold even let Loki kill him, or maybe he asked Loki to kill him. Maybe he asked Loki to kill him knowing that that was in the best interest of Elbaf. Anyways, I have discussed the whole Loki-King Harold situation at length, and I do mean at length because, look at that video. That video is over an hour and a half long, but I do actually recommend that you go check that video out. And to make sure that you don't miss out on any of my other discussions about One Piece, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What a smooth transition, I didn't even plan that. Okay, back to chapter 1146. There's no other way of saying this. The Straw Hats got absolutely folded this chapter. My god. In more recent weeks, I have been saying that the Straw Hats are actually getting pretty good moments, that they're getting little chances to shine here and there, but that was not the case in this chapter. They got absolutely wrecked. Actually, you know what? Don't get me wrong. There were a few moments where I actually still did get impressed. I have to say, Usopp showed much more bravery in this chapter than previous chapters, and I do think it is worth noting that Usopp is the only one that was able to land an attack on Gunko, and Gunko didn't actually pull a reverse back onto Usopp's attack compared to the rest of the Straw Hats, and that does actually make me wonder whether this says something, whether this means anything about the future of their battles. Also, Brook correctly deducing that Gunko must be a holy knight, that's a plus aura for Brook. And that did actually catch me off guard because I didn't think Brook would be aware of the holy knights, but then in retrospect, I guess it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because we do know that Brook was once part of a special convoy of a certain kingdom, a yet to be disclosed kingdom. But assuming that this kingdom was world government affiliated and was, or therefore attended reveries, I guess it's fair to assume that Brook may have encountered the Holy Knights in his past, or at least may have heard about the Holy Knights because of his special position. I guess what surprised me especially was that Brook knew about the Holy Knights and Jinbei didn't, especially, because of Jinbei's past as one of the Shichibukai. But then as a more specialized force within the world government, I guess it is possible that the warlords didn't actually know the full extent of all the different ranks of the different positions and the different groups within the world government, and we don't actually get to see Jinbei's reaction to Brook here, so we don't know whether he is even or indeed aware that this group exists. Anyways, this has been a pretty tough chapter for Jinbei in any case. Or like I said, it's a rough chapter for all the Straw Hats. Aside from the monster trio who essentially didn't get any screen time in chapter 1146, minus a Luffy in a food coma, the Straw Hats got absolutely folded. They got absolutely wrecked. The Holy Knights are not for show. That much is very, very clear. I'm sure the most surprising or the most disappointing show for anyone would have been Jinbei. I'm sure that power scalers are having an absolute meltdown right now, or alternatively a field day, depending on how you look at it. But personally, I actually have to say the way the Straw Hats versus Gunko unfolded, that was to be somewhat expected. I mean, I'm not gonna say I wasn't surprised, because admittedly, I think it is quite unusual to see someone of Jinbei's experience in this sort of predicament. But as far as storytelling goes, I think it is just part of how Oda hypes up new characters. Not all combat scenes, not all combat scenarios play out according to the logical power scaling standpoint. Even Luffy sometimes gets used to hype up new antagonists. So I have to say, my view on Jinbei as a combatant, it hasn't changed at all after this chapter. I do think the way that the combat scenario played out in this chapter just really goes to highlight that the Holy Knights are real powerhouses, that they pose an actual threat, and I guess that is quite necessary given how late this group was introduced into the story. It does also raise some really interesting questions about Gunko especially. I have been long saying that Gunko, since Shamrock's departure, is the one to look out for in this arc. And with every chapter, I think Oda seems to be bearing more truth to that. I most certainly wasn't expecting her to have the regenerative ability. And of course, now that means we have to wonder, does this mean each of the Holy Knights have the regenerative ability? Personally, I'm gonna say that I'm inclined to think that this is actually special and specific to Gunko only. To me, it seems like the regenerative ability might be closely linked to the immortality that we've seen of both Imu and the Gorosei. That regeneration, immortality, they might be, somehow interrelated. And in that case, we do know that the Holy Knights age because we've seen Garling age. So I'm inclined to think that not all of the Holy Knights have the regenerative ability. And I do rather feel like Gunko in general has been quite highlighted to be a very special Holy Knight. We have a very interesting design choice with the mismatched eyes, the fact that her devil fruit seems to be somewhat similar to Imu's, and it also seems like she's the only one of the Holy Knights that have been introduced so far that isn't part of an established big Celestial Dragon family. That she may not actually be of, Celestial Dragon lineage, heritage. So all these clues seem to be pointing to Gunko being a special Holy Knight that Imu has specifically chosen for a very special reason. Or alternatively, Gunko may even be actually part of the same family as Imu. Might actually be part of the Neurona family, and Oda may have actually intentionally hid Gunko's family name so that it's an even bigger surprise later. But I do think I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyways, I have discussed my thoughts, my speculations on Gunko in the past, so go check that out. But in the meantime, I do think we should also consider the reverse, the alternative, because on the other hand, if each of the Holy Knights do actually have regenerative abilities, I think this actually makes it a perfect training scenario for the Straw Hats to find out and figure out how to bypass this very pesky ability, this very pesky power. This was a major problem in Egghead against the Gorosei that the Straw Hats never really figured out. The Elbathians don't even have an answer to it. Whereas, now that we may be actually faced with a very similar situation at Elbaf, the presence of Scopper Gaban, that may be the answer here. We know that the Roger Pirates fought against not only the Rocks Pirates at God Valley, but that the Holy Knights were actually also involved. And so, if Gaban faced against the Holy Knights at God Valley, and each of the Holy Knights, all the Holy Knights also have regenerative abilities, it is very well possible that Gaban has dealt with regenerative abilities in the past, and so he might actually know and he might be able to help the Straw Hats figure this out. And speaking of Gaban, Gunko successfully kidnapping Colin opens up very interesting potential scenarios as to who Gaban is going to fight, who he's going to pursue in this battle. battle. I have long said that my ideal matchup would be Gabon versus Summers because, you know, it would be a very dynamic battle between two old veterans with their clashing views, their clashing ideals on love. But now with Colin, Gabon's son, being kidnapped, I do wonder whether this creates a personal vendetta or a personal motive for Gabon, or at least poses some urgency for Gabon to take Gunko on. In which case, I actually think that the Gabon and Gunko face-off would also be a very interesting matchup, mainly because I would like to see how Gabon reacts to fighting a woman. You know, similarities have been made between Sanji and Gabon, and so with Gabon being the self-proclaimed minister of love, I wonder whether he shares the same values as Sanji when it comes to fighting women. Now, this leaves us with Summers and Killingham, and as far as Killingham goes in chapter 1146, I have to say I was also a little disappointed with how Robin was depicted in this chapter. In fact, I was probably more disappointed with how Robin was handled more so than Jinbei. Summers beats up Robin's oldest, dearest friend, and she's just shown cowering away. And maybe I'm being too harsh, I guess it was just unexpected. Especially after some of her recent achievements, some of her really big moments, you know, namely the way that she showed up for Sanji at Wano, the big threat that she made to Black Maria about how hurting any of her friends is going to elicit some real pain, you know, how this is going to give birth to her demonio form. Well, this is a very similar situation, and Robin, it's your oldest friend, it is your turn now to protect Saul. And again, I know I'm being too harsh. I understand that the emotional beat that Oda seems to be going for here, it seems like the presence of Saul has just turned Robin back to being a child. And you know, I really do understand that because of her circumstances, because of the life that she's led, she hasn't had a chance to be a child. So in some ways, yes, it is very sweet to see that dynamic between Saul and Robin. The fact that they, you know, fall into this old familiar dynamic with Saul being her protector. And you know what, she must be experiencing some PTSD or something, the poor thing. But that being said, I mean, I'm sure we all agree that Robin is actually stronger than Saul, right? I mean, I understand why this depiction of Robin was necessary for this chapter, but I am fully expecting to see, fully hoping to see that Robin does make a comeback in another chapter, in a future chapter, where she's going to really show to Saul that he doesn't need to worry about her anymore, that she is capable, that she's grown up and it's her turn to save him. I think that's going to be a really nice full circle moment. Or an alternative, because I can picture it going another way. With the absence of the monster trio in this chapter, it is also possible that they are going to get some really magnificent heroic entrances into the battle, and we're actually going to see that the monster trio are going to come to the rescue of the Straw Hats, who are clearly struggling at the moment. And so maybe this is actually going to result in a moment, you know, a line where Saul recognizes that Robin really has found good friends. Saul is going to be assured that Robin has indeed found friends that are going to protect her, and so that he doesn't need to worry anymore. And that would also be sweet, but personally, I think it would detract from Robin's character growth, especially the one that we saw in Wano, if she doesn't get involved in the action herself. I mean, Robin is just such a serious powerhouse in her own right, and damn it, I want to see her being recognized as such. So here's to fully hoping that we get another appearance of the demonio form in Elbaf. I mean, especially now that we actually have real nightmare demons here. It'll be the demonio versus the demons. I mean, that would be epic. Also, I haven't really been commenting on the cover spread as of late, but I do think it would be remiss of me not to note that Yamato seems to be really following Oden's footsteps now. On top of the Wano pilgrimage, Yamato now seems to have gained followers, admirers of their own, and they're not too happy about it. They are very reluctant, and this is obviously mirroring Oden's early relationship with his retainers, with his scabbards, and it's very cute, very funny, but it also is growing the huge potential for this group, for Yamato's group to expand, and how they're going to be of use in the final battle, the final war, when it does indeed start. Because Oda has once again heralded that the final war is on its way, and I'm sure we all can't wait. Until then, this has been another very solid chapter. You know what, Elbaf just really hasn't missed. I'd say another solid 8 out of 10, but as always, let me know what you think by leaving a comment below, and if you enjoyed today's discussion, please like the video, share the video, and And please do subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future discussions, but also to help your fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it. You can also help the channel further like these wonderful people by becoming a Patreon or channel member. But as always, I really just appreciate you being here. So thank you for listening to another one of my ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.